If you clicked on this video, you probably have some confusion regarding the term Chinese in one way or another. Maybe you're an American-born Chinese who identifies as Chinese, but when you tell your Chinese international student friends who are from China that you are Chinese, they look at you like you're crazy. Maybe you've always thought that Chinese was a language until you discovered the terms Cantonese and Mandarin, and you realize that they are both languages that fall under the umbrella term Chinese. So you ask your Chinese friend for clarification. Chinese is not a language, right? And your Chinese friend looks at you like you're stupid, and they say, Chinese is a language, Cantonese is a dialect. So you're left confused, feeling ashamed that you even asked that question. If so, you're at the right place. Because not only am I going to explain everything in simple terms, I'm also going to address why misalignments happen in conversations. Now, personally, I can talk about this topic and all the nuances that comes with the term Chinese for hours, but let's be real, you're not going to be able to retain any information that way. So in order to address this topic as simply as possible, I've decided to divide this video into 4 main takeaways. And my hope is that by the end of this video, you'll be able to have a more informed perspective to talk about this topic with anyone, no matter where they're from. By the way, if you're new to my channel, my name is Natalie. Although I am not a professor at a university who teaches Chinese, I do speak Mandarin Chinese and English fluently, and I've lived in China, France, the Netherlands, and the United States. So I have first-hand experiences of seeing people being confused about this topic, and because I've lived in multiple countries, I've also made my own observations of what is causing this confusion in the first place. So if you're interested, keep watching. Takeaway number 1. There are more ways to say the term Chinese in Chinese than in English. I want you to take a look at these Chinese words. Don't worry, this is not a Chinese test. Just take a look at them. There are 23 terminologies here. So logically speaking, if you were to translate these 23 terminologies, you would be able to come up with 23 words in English as well, right? That's what you might think, but you'll be wrong. Here's the truth. Most of the time, these words would just be translated to Chinese. Why? Because English isn't as precise as Chinese when it comes to the term Chinese, if you know what I mean. There are 23 terminologies in Chinese to describe the term Chinese, and probably even more, to be honest. Each term has their own nuance and context that you should use it in, but in English, we tend to just use the word Chinese for everything here. As you can see, this can create a lot of confusion when a person whose first language is Chinese talks to a person whose first language is English. The first group of words refers to Chinese people, and the second group of words refers to the language. I'm not going to explain the definition of each word, but here are some examples to illustrate how nuanced each term can be. 中国人 refers to someone from China who holds a Chinese passport. 华人 refers to someone who is culturally Chinese or has Chinese ancestry. They may or may not hold a Chinese passport. 华裔 refers to someone who has Chinese ancestry and they do not have a Chinese passport. So it typically refers to someone who has citizenship in North America, Europe, Australia, or Southeast Asia, who comes from an immigrant family. Hanzu refers to someone who is ethnically Han, and it doesn't matter if they hold a Chinese passport or not, and it doesn't matter where they live or where they were born. The Han people are also the largest ethnic group in the world, by the way. This is probably still confusing, so let's use myself as an example. Am I a 中国人? No, I am not, because I don't hold a Chinese passport. I hold a French passport. Doesn't matter if I was born in China or not. Am I a 华人? Yes, because I have Chinese ancestry, and I also feel culturally Chinese. Am I a 华裔? Yes, because I have Chinese ancestry, and I do not hold a Chinese passport because I come from an immigrant family who has citizenship in France. Am I a Hanzu? Yes, I am just simply ethnically Han. Now let's look at another profile. Let's think about a Filipino from the Philippines who has Chinese ancestry. So, Chinese Filipinos. Is this person a 中国人? No, because if they're from the Philippines, then they hold a Filipino passport. They don't hold a Chinese passport because China does not allow dual citizenship. Is this person a 华人? Yes, because they have Chinese ancestry and they probably feel culturally Chinese to a certain extent as well. Is this person a 华裔? Yes, because they have Chinese ancestry and they do not have a Chinese passport and they come from an immigrant family who probably immigrated to the Philippines 100 years ago or 150 years ago. Is this person a Hanzu? I would say yes. Historically speaking, the majority of Filipino Chinese came from the province of Fujian in China. They are specifically the Hokkien people, which is a subgroup of the Han people. Okay, let's pause here. I just want to note that even Chinese people who are native Chinese speakers get confused by these terminologies. So if you're learning Chinese, please don't get discouraged by how overwhelming this might feel. Okay, but if I am an American-born Chinese, I'm Chinese American, how should I communicate that in Chinese? You can say you are a 美国华裔. 美国 means United States, so you just add the country as the prefix before 华裔. With that being said, my point here is that if an Anglophone were to ask someone, are you Chinese? How should they even reply to that question? Like, are you asking about my nationality or my ethnicity or my cultural identity? So this leads to my second takeaway. Your answer to the question, are you Chinese, depends on your model of thinking. Let's think about the question, are you Chinese, and how different profiles might answer this question. When an American-born Chinese hears this question, they might answer, yes, I am Chinese. Why? Because they operate based on an ethnicity-based model of thinking. What does that mean? When I lived in the States, I heard an American friend say, I'm Italian. Bear in mind, this person does not speak Italian and was born and raised in the United States. I was confused at first. I was thinking, why would you call yourself Italian when you don't even speak Italian? And then I realized that it's because we have different models of thinking. He's saying that he's Italian because he has Italian heritage, which is perfectly valid. I was confused because in my mind, you can only say you're Italian if you have an Italian passport. Otherwise, you have to say you're Italian American or just American. I was operating with a nationality-based model of thinking. So why does this happen? Americans tend to operate with an ethnicity-based model of thinking because society taught them the US is a culturally diverse country and we should be proud of our cultural roots. When I lived in the States, I even met someone who is technically not an American-born Chinese because he wasn't born in America, he was born in China, but he came to the States when he was 4 years old and has since then been living in the States. And so he identifies as Chinese American, but he just has a green card and he does not actually hold American citizenship. I think he said that his parents just didn't apply for citizenship even though he meets all the requirements. And this happens more common than you think. On the other hand, mainland Chinese people tend to operate with a nationality-based model of thinking. Society taught them Chinese people exist all over the world, but to be considered as a 中国人, aka a China person, you need to have a Chinese passport. If you have a foreign passport, you're not Chinese anymore. You're not a 中国人 anymore. China does not allow dual citizenship. The edge case of you having nationality in China and in another country will not happen, technically speaking. Now, growing up in France and the Netherlands, I also think that Europe operates with a nationality-based model of thinking. If you're a European watching this, let me know if you agree. But back to my story. After this experience, I realized while living in the US, if someone asks me, are you Chinese? I better say that I'm Chinese, but when I'm in China, I will make it clear that I have a French nationality to avoid any misunderstandings that can happen. And this is where the scenario that I talked about at the beginning of this video might happen. When an ABC encounters a Chinese international student, the ABC might say, I'm Chinese. And the Chinese international student might say, how can you say you're Chinese when you don't even speak Chinese? You're American. Because in the ABC's mind, he's thinking, I'm a 华人 or a 华裔. And for the Chinese international student whose first language isn't English, he's thinking, well, you are not a 中国人, you are a 美国人. Why is this 美国人 saying that he's a 中国人? Like, don't you know that your family already immigrated to the States like a long time ago? And so the ABC, whose Chinese might not be that good and might not understand all the nuance that comes with the term 中国人, might say, I am a 中国人. And the Chinese international student will say, well, you are not a 中国人 because you are not from China. And the ABC will proceed to have an existential crisis because for his whole life, people have been telling him to go back to China. In addition, if you are a Chinese-French person who is born and raised in France, or if you're a Filipino Chinese who is born and raised in the Philippines, you're going to have your own model of thinking as well. And it might be different from both the ABC and the Chinese international student from China. But you're wrong. I've met an ABC who said that they're American instead of they're Chinese when being asked this question. While my explanations for these models are convenient, in reality things can still be complicated because not all ABCs think the same way and not all mainland Chinese people think the same way. I know, crazy, right? I've met ABCs who are completely fluent in Chinese and even watch Chinese TV shows and movies and listen to Chinese music. And I've met ABCs who speaks no word of Chinese and low-key does not want to be Chinese. I've met mainland Chinese people who would never ever want to go back and live in China. And I've met mainland Chinese people who are happily living in China and would never ever move to the United States or any other country. So it really depends on how much you want to zoom in and zoom out of the full picture. And this leads to my next takeaway. Takeaway number 3. What counts as a language or a dialect depends not only on linguistics, but also on politics. This pattern of how education shapes your thinking doesn't only apply to identity. It also applies to how we classify languages. In mainland China, people are taught that Cantonese is a dialect. Internationally speaking, Cantonese is recognized as a language on its own because of the global influence of Hong Kong. Hong Kong people speak Cantonese. But here's a fact. Cantonese is a language / dialect, whatever you want to call. It is a language of the Han people. And people speak Cantonese not only in Hong Kong, but also in mainland China, such as Guangdong. Therefore, if you think about it, in mainland China, Mandarin is a standard language that everyone speaks, but Cantonese is seen as a dialect. Because everyone needs to learn Mandarin, but you don't have to learn Cantonese. You know Cantonese because your family passes it down to you, or in your community, people speak Cantonese. But in school, you learn Mandarin. And so if it is from the Chinese family, everything other than Mandarin is seen as a dialect. For example, if you've ever heard Wenzhonese or Wenzhouhua, you'll realize that it sounds nothing like any other languages that you've ever heard. As a Mandarin speaker, it just sounds like an alien language to me. But it is considered as a dialect in China, not a language. And it is also not, internationally speaking, considered as a language. Linguistically speaking, the difference between Wenzhonese and Mandarin is probably bigger than the difference between Cantonese and Mandarin. And on top of that, if you go from village A to village B in Wenzhou, even though both villages speak Wenzhonese, they're not speaking the same kind of Wenzhonese. It's like there's a dialect within Wenzhonese. On the other hand, Cantonese gets the language check outside of mainland China because it's so international. Even in the States, we have Cantonese speakers, while Wenzhonese doesn't get that treatment because it's not internationally relevant. So is Chinese a language? Linguistically speaking, Chinese is a group of language that includes languages like Mandarin and Cantonese and Wenzhonese. In mainland China, however, we see Mandarin Chinese as the official language of China and everything else as dialects, with the exception of the languages of ethnic minorities, which I'll talk about later, so don't worry. From an international perspective, Mandarin counts as a language under the Chinese umbrella term, which encapsulates all the Chinese languages. And so Cantonese also counts as its own language under Chinese, but Wenzhonese just counts as a Chinese dialect because people don't talk about it. If you speak Mandarin, Cantonese, and Wenzhonese, you probably don't exist. But if you do exist, don't worry, because other people might not understand how impressive you are, but I do. In my mind, you speak 3 languages. That's how impressive you are. Okay, so far I've only talked about the languages of the Han people. So what about ethnic minorities in China? Takeaway number 4. China is not a homogeneous country. The Han ethnic group makes up about 92% of mainland China's population. The rest of the people are not Han. They have their own language and culture, and China agrees with that. The languages of ethnic minority groups such as Uyghur, Tibetan, Korean, even Russian, yeah, they are not considered as dialects in China. They are not because they are not from the Han people. They are their own language. And yes, the ones that I just listed, they are all ethnic groups that exist in mainland China. In fact, China has 56 ethnicities. Here is the full list of ethnicities in China if you're interested. You might be surprised, but China has always been a region that has had multiple ethnicities that coexisted. And there has even been time periods where the ethnic minority group is the group that ruled China. For example, during the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols ruled China. During the 16 Kingdoms period, multiple non-Han ethnic groups ruled different parts of China because there were like 16 kingdoms. During the Qing dynasty, which is the last dynasty in China, the Manchus ruled China. Because of this, you might think qipao is a Han Chinese traditional clothing. But no, traditional qipao is actually Manchu. And so, is qipao Chinese? I don't know, it depends on how you interpret that word. So yes, things can be confusing. If you still find it hard to imagine what ethnic minorities in China look like, here are some examples of actual Chinese celebrities who are ethnic minorities. And just bear in mind that these are just the celebrities that I know, so don't be like, oh, why didn't you include that person or that person? Whatever. And this is not exhaustive at all. By the way, each ethnic group also has their own instruments, traditional clothing, and even singing techniques. So it can become really interesting if you dive deep into it. I actually used to play the guzheng, which is a Han traditional instrument. In China, growing up, people have been taught we have 56 ethnicities. We are a culturally diverse country. So like, are ethnic minorities Chinese? Let's assume you are speaking English to an ethnic minority from China. Probably the ethnic minority that you're talking to who comes from China will say, I'm Chinese or I'm from China. When you are abroad, nationality comes as the first response to the question, where are you from? And because you hold a Chinese passport, you are Chinese. This is how people in China and probably many other parts of the world were raised to think. This is a little bit unlike how Americans think. I've personally never heard an American say, I'm from the US when they are abroad. They always say their like ethnicity, like their heritage, or which state or city that they're from.
And I'm from Sweden.
And I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm from Korea.
And I'm from Brazil.
And I'm from Dallas, Texas.
From Switzerland.
From Slovakia. And I'm Indian from LA.
And I'm Chinese American from Honolulu, Hawaii.
So people are just, raised differently. If it is not clear by now, the purpose of this video isn't to ridicule a particular group of people for not understanding what Chinese means, because there isn't even a consensus on what it means when we speak in English. It's just too broad of a term. First of all, are you talking about people or language? Ultimately, the limitations of the English language, the limitations of our own language abilities, and the lack of understanding of other people's culture and history and model of thinking is what will lead to miscommunication and misunderstandings. Not everyone's first language is English, and not everyone's first language is Chinese. And if there's one thing, just one thing that I want you to take away from this video, is that I think we should all just be more considerate to each other and understand that we all have our own models of thinking based on how we were raised. So don't be too quick to attack others or judge others or accuse others. And I really do hope that this video clarifies some of the confusions that you might have had with this term, whether you're Chinese or not. So if you enjoyed this video, share it with your friends. And as always, feel free to leave any comments. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video.